It's the World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour, in the company of Christopher Dickey of the Daily Beast. How are you, sir?
Very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. Nice to welcome back as well Anne Bagameri of the International New York Times.
Well done.
It's been, what, 2 years since you changed?
3 years since the change was
years.
announced.
Oh, dear.
2.5 since the change was
Time
made.
flies.
It does.
Anne Bagameri, welcome back. Welcome back as well. I say welcome back to France 24 Senam Chantier because you were covering the elections in Iran. We'll be talking about that in a short while. And also back from the field, Eric Randolph of the French news agency AFP. You were in Calais covering the refugee and migrant crisis. We'll also be talking about that in a bit. The World This Week, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24Debate. For many, he's the man who put the B in BRICS, supporters of Brazil's iconic former president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, up in arms over the raid on his Sao Paulo home and his detention for 3 hours as part of the Petrobras scandal. The ever-widening probe now centering on a luxury seaside apartment and country house that authorities say were given to the ex-president as bribes. Lula firmly denies that they're his. The public prosecutors also accusing his successor, current president Dilma Rousseff, of benefiting in a scheme devised by the state oil firm. Christopher Dickey, it's startling to see Lula in the dock, even if it's just for 3 hours, and also for the first time, the finger pointed at the current president of Brazil.
Yeah, but that's what the prosecutors are always going to want to do. They have to go up as high as they possibly can go. In every one of these scandals, I was looking over the record. Anytime you have a big state oil company, you have these kinds of allegations. I mean, those of us who were covering France in the 90s, remember it was Alpha Aquitaine here. In Mexico, it was Pemex in the 80s. Every time, because there's just so much money slushing around, if you will. And the politicians inevitably think that they can use some of that money for campaign purposes. Now, whether Lula himself was involved with that, I don't know. I don't know if anybody in Brazil was involved with that, but it wouldn't be surprising. What is also not surprising is that the prosecutors want to take that to the highest possible level because that gets them publicity, it keeps the investigation moving, and usually there is some political agenda on the part of the prosecutors as well.
A political agenda on the part of the prosecutors. However, I guess you could call it a major catch. Brazilian media reporting Thursday that one ruling party senator very close to both Lula and Dilma Rousseff, who's turning state's evidence.
Well, people try and protect themselves, and maybe everybody is involved. I don't know. I mean, this is one of those terribly, terribly complicated cases once you get into the weeds of the allegations. But it seems to me that it's just going to go on and on. I mean, I think the Alpha Aquitaine investigation here went on for 8 or 10 years and was finally fairly inconclusive. And that wouldn't surprise me if the same thing happened in Brazil.
This happens the same week that we find that Brazil's economy shrank 3.8% last year. Worst performer of the G20. Of course, this is a far cry from the days when Lula himself was in power. Is this in a sense, a story of a healthy democracy where the judiciary calls the executive to task, or is this just, well, the rot's been uncovered?
Could be a little bit of both. You certainly have to respect the prosecutors for being willing to go as high as they have, because usually in something like this, we certainly saw it in the Watergate investigations in America. If you shoot too high and miss, everybody feels secure. So prosecutors aren't usually willing to go too high unless they've got the goods. At a time when, as you pointed out in the open, a former BRIC economy. The BRICS, let's remember, were supposed to be the engines that would fuel growth when the developed economies started to sputter. To see one of them falter, and in fact to have seen most of them falter, because essentially they were resource-rich economies, and when the price of that resource falls, it's like a low tide exposing the pits in the bottom of the seafloor. It's not unheard of that at that point everybody starts getting a little bit nervous about the underpinnings of the economy. Let's never forget that Petrobras was 10% of Brazil's gross domestic product. This is an economy that is so heavily dependent on resources, and for the size of the economy, anything shaking up either the price of oil or the governance at the largest company in the economy is going to have big repercussions.
The price of oil, which is really hitting rock bottom, and that's throwing everyone it's really changed the equation in places like Brazil.
Absolutely, and as we've just been hearing from our colleagues, this is one of the biggest investigations that's taking place in Brazil. And it doesn't just involve someone like Lula, it's a whole host of businesses and a whole host of politicians. And it's not just the impact on the economy, which has, under Lula and his predecessor, actually suffered some 25% in terms of inflation, the worst that it's seen over the past quarter of a century. And so we'll just have to keep a close eye to see how far they manage to take this, because it could actually lead to a quick change of government if it goes as far as they want to take it.
Eric Randolph, will we have a different president when the Olympic Games open in Rio in August?
I think a lot of Brazilians would hope so. I'm not sure whether they'll get their wish. I think I was reading on the way here that Rousseff has 7.7% approval rating at the moment, which actually makes President Hollande
I was going to say, the only person who makes Hollande look good.
It's incredible, yeah. And I think 2/3 of the country want to see her impeached. So it's really not looking good for her. I mean, you realise the amount of hype that gets built up around emerging market economies sometimes. When I dip into Brazilian news every now and again, it feels not so long ago that I was hearing about Brazil as one of the great engines that was going to power the global economy. And it was heralded as one of the great social reforming countries, a great example to places like India and elsewhere, and then next thing I hear about it is that it's in a state of complete collapse.
All right, we know definitely is that there'll be a different president in the United States come next January. Who it will be, well, the picture's getting clear, at least in terms of the race for the nomination. The numbers don't lie. The Republican Party, you could say, recoiling in horror after Super Tuesday at the site of the delegate count for their nominating convention. Now the leadership has pulled out all the stops, getting its past two standard bearers to speak out against the Donald. But in the case of 2012 candidate Mitt Romney, a few clicks on the internet, and the contrast can be cruel between this past Thursday, what he said, and 4 years ago.
Donald Trump is a phony, a fraud. His promises are as worthless as a degree from Trump University. Being in Donald Trump's magnificent hotel and having his endorsement is a delight. I'm so honored and pleased to have his endorsement. Donald Trump has shown an extraordinary ability to understand how our economy works, to create jobs for the American people.
Christopher Dickey, what's going on inside the Republican Party?
It's an implosion.
Is it an implosion?
It is an implosion. I mean, look, nobody really knows what Donald Trump represents. We can call him a racist and a fascist and all the things that people are calling him all the time. But the truth is, people don't know what he represents. He changes his position all the time. He's a showman. He's playing to the audience, to the peanut gallery, as they used to say, at every opportunity. And the peanut gallery is turning out in droves. They're very enthusiastic about him. But he's not an ideologue. He's not like Ted Cruz, for instance, who really is an ideologue, as Ted Cruz likes to point out every time he gets on the stage with Trump.
Because that is the question people have been asking me here, is what exactly scares the Republicans so much about Donald Trump?
As they don't know where he stands. They're not even convinced he's a real Republican, and with reason. I mean, he hasn't been a stalwart of the party. That's why his remarks some years ago when he said that President Obama deserved at least a B+ for the way he handled his first year in office has had such resonance in the news, because it's, how could a good Republican say this? But the other problem is that the Republican Party has moved off into Never Never Land. It has been dominated by these freakish, stupid weirdos that have dominated Congress and brought the country to an absolute standstill. Mm-hmm. So you've got one part of the Republican Party that says, that was right. These ideologues in the Republican Party, if only we were more ideological, we would set everything straight. Then you've got another part that says, well, Donald Trump, he may not be a real Republican and he may be crazy in some ways, but at least he's interesting, he's dynamic, he's exciting, and he's not an ideologue. And then you have the mainstream, the Mitt Romney group, who think, we just don't feel comfortable with this guy. We'd like a solid, old, mainstream Republican like Mitt Romney was. Except, as, of course, Trump points out, Mitt Romney was one hell of a loser. So Where does that leave them? Nowhere is where it leaves them unless Hillary implodes on the Democratic side, and that's possible too.
All right, the rest of the world watching open-mouthed the debate Thursday night in Detroit. Trump's rivals ganging up on the real estate tycoon/reality TV star, albeit a bit late, and as you'll see, with mitigated success.
2/3 of the people who have cast a vote in a Republican primary or caucus have voted against you. They do not want you to be our nominee. And the reason why is because we are not going to turn over the conservative movement or the party of Lincoln or Reagan, for example, to someone whose positions are not conservative.
Don't worry about it, little Marco.
Gentlemen,
Let's hear it.
gentlemen,
You ought to show up.
gentlemen, you got to do better than those.
This guy has the number one.
Mr. Trump, may I ask you,
absentee
Mr. Trump,
record in the
I'd like to ask you a
United
policy
States.
question.
And back, Mary, why are you shaking your head?
I am absolutely fascinated by this show. There's a lot to say about Donald Trump in that particular clip. One of the things to say about it is he's not wrong. Rubio has a terrible attendance record in the Senate. And occasionally, more than occasionally, Donald Trump says something in a fairly vulgar way, but he says something that is correct. And so you can't just dismiss everything he's saying as the ravings of a whack job. And apart from not really knowing where he stands, sometimes, it's like a room full of monkeys. They'll eventually, tapping on typewriters will eventually produce the Bible. He eventually does produce things that are true. The Republican Party is got a real problem. First of all, it's not really a party of one group of it's not a bloc. There are basically three different groups within the Republican Party,
People
all
have been
arguing.
asking us since last night. You have at one point an argument over the manliness of Donald Trump among the candidates. It's not just him.
No.
They were just talking about his fingers, really.
Yeah, no, there is the big problem, and the reason you have these digressions into this particular topic and others is that the Republican Party has still not really given the voters a clear picture of what it stands for. Is it the right-wing ideologues? Is it the conservatives, as Rubio seems to think? I saw that and I started laughing. He really thinks that people are going to revolt from Trump, are not going to vote for Trump because he's not a conservative. Has he looked at what Trump voters care about? Has he looked at what American voters care about? They're not interested in labels. They're not interested in party control. And I guess really, to go back to your question to Chris, what are the Republicans so afraid of? Well, I think what they're really afraid of here is that they can't control this guy. He's running under their standard because they begged him not to run as a third-party candidate, and they can't control him. They would like nothing better than to have a Mitt Romney who would enter the race as a moderate and whom they could yank to the right for their own purposes to run him in a presidential campaign. They can't do it with Donald Trump, and it scares the living daylights out of them.
Sanam Chantier, is Donald Trump a topic of conversation in Iran?
Absolutely. Donald Trump is at the moment being compared to Iran's previous hardline president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Believe it or not.
I've heard that.
Absolutely.
Really?
Because of Ahmadinejad was very much the same. He didn't have policies. He'd pick certain communities to attack, like Iran's so-called homosexual community that doesn't actually exist in the country, or he'd go against the US and he'd lash out without actually ever having anything to provide in terms of evidence. And he was mocked by Iranians and the international community. And so they're actually saying that Trump is actually trumping Ahmadinejad in his stupidity.
Eric Randolph?
I think there's one aspect to this that gets forgotten, which is that Donald Trump does something which a lot of the other candidates and a lot of other politicians find very difficult to do, which is that he is enjoyable for the people that watch him. That people have a good time.
Yeah, I heard Anne just say that she's watching this show.
Yeah, exactly.
It is a show. The
And it's
campaign is a show.
And he is saying the things that people wish politicians said. I think in a way, America is at the point of supreme decadence here. It's got to that stage at which people have become so jaded and so cynical, and also so comfortable that they think, hey, why not vote for a guy like Trump? Wouldn't it be funny if Trump became president?
I don't think it's just a comfort level. There's an anger level in the United States that he taps into very well, and that's really the thing. That's what the conservatives thought, that they were reflecting American anger and all this talk about conservative values, but it's a lot more inchoate than that. And he is a perfect expression of the inchoate anger of his base, which is basically saying, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. Now, do they have reason to be as mad as all that? Personally, I don't think so. But they listen to talk radio, they watch Fox News, they're told all the time, you should be angry because America's not great anymore, people don't respect us, and he just taps into that.
And it doesn't really matter whether what he's saying is fact-based, because the fact that he says it is enough for his followers. They just love the fact that he gets up there and he says what he does. I bet they turned the dials all the way up to 100 when he said what he did about how his fingers do not reflect on every part of his anatomy. I'm sure they all loved it. Is it presidential? No. Is it embarrassing? Absolutely. But did they love it? I'm sure that they did.
We're talking about it now.
We are talking about it now.
And
he
it
is
brings
a
us-
very clever communicator.
And it brings us to the next logical question. There were also Democratic primaries on Tuesday. Hillary Clinton building a substantial lead. She won 7 states. Left-wing Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders winning 4. And when you look at the numbers there, she's on her way, but she hasn't yet clinched the nomination. Anne Baghameri will. Hillary Clinton, how will she fare against Donald Trump when it's time actually to pick a president?
Crystal ball in this election, you're asking me to predict what's. No, I'm not going to do that. I will say this much. I would not count on Donald Trump getting the Republican nomination. I would not. I would more.
Really?
Yeah, no. There are, partly because of delegate math, there are some primaries coming up where he will not do as well. That was, I think, the Trump forces throwing something at me. Yeah. There are primaries coming up where the demographics don't really favor his message, and so you may see enough, even without the manipulations of the Republican
Party.
Party.
Lead in Florida, for instance.
We're going to see how that plays out. That may not. I mean, this is a very unpredictable campaign. I think we're looking actually, even the Republicans, for a brokered convention. And out of a brokered convention, I don't think you're going to see Trump as the nominee. I think you probably will see Hillary Clinton as the Democratic nominee. I think Bernie is fighting the good fight, and I think he will make good on his words that he will go all the way to the end, because I think he wants to be an influence, if not the king, maybe the king maker, or the queen maker, if you like.
Sorry, I mean, I think one of the scariest aspects of it doesn't even matter if Trump gets the nomination at this stage. The effect that he's had on American politics just by getting this far, and just by altering the way in which politics has been done in the last year, is going to have a lasting impact, regardless of whether the Republican Party implodes. It's the same thing that we've seen over here in Europe, in the way that the Front National has managed to shift the way in which issues like immigration are talked about, and the same things we've had in England with UKIP and parties like that just by their presence and just by gathering so much media attention, they actually shift the framework.
Yeah, but I think there's a difference, because I think UKIP or certainly the Front National here, these really are ideological parties.
All right, we're going to pick up on those points when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week, just when it's getting good.